Hello everyone, it's Jeff Rich here from the Burning Archive, and welcome to the night of nights in world literature, the announcement of the 2024 Nobel Prize for Literature, the world's most prestigious and famous literary prize. I don't know if it's the longest or the wealthiest. It's worth about $1 million US. $11 million in Swedish krona, but it is certainly, I guess, the best window onto the whole world's literature of any of the literary prizes around the world, I think. And since 1901, there have been 120 winners. We're going to find out the 121st winner in about an hour from Stockholm. And over the last 120 days, I have read every single one of those 120 Nobel laureates as part of my 120 Nobel's reading challenge. I'll tell you a little bit more about that shortly, but let me also just welcome everyone and encourage everyone just to say hi if you want to on the chat. Introduce yourself. You don't have to, of course. Guard your privacy and abide by the YouTube community guidelines. They always recommend that on YouTube. We don't want any hate speech on this channel, and I would it's an extraordinary event, the Nobel Prize for Literature. Really, it's a week in Sweden where all the Nobels are announced. The Nobel Peace Prize is announced in Norway. It's awarded by a committee from Norway. Hi from Melbourne, from Tanya Paxton. Hi, Tanya. Welcome to the stream. And the Nobel Peace Prize is announced tomorrow, but tonight is the Nobel Literature Prize. And what I'm going to do this evening is until about 10 o'clock Australian time. So for the next hour or 50 odd minutes, I'm going to give you a bit of a preview of the highly tipped, predicted winners of the Nobel Prize for Literature, as well as do a bit of a rundown on the 120 Nobel Reading Challenge that I've been doing over the last 120 days on both YouTube right here, but also on my Substack, and you can see my Substack address there, jeffrich.substack.com. And there I've been writing weekly posts and essays on the Nobel laureates all the way from 1901 to 2023, and I've also been giving versions of those on YouTube, so do check those out. Go over to jeffrich.substack.com, subscribe. You can also become a paid subscriber and support my work. And also, if you become a paid subscriber, you can actually access a new feature I've just set up there, which is the Nobel Archive. Let me just show you that. Let's see. I'm operating a lot of things here at the moment. So yes, there you can see the Substack. And I'll just scroll down and show you all the different articles I've been writing on the Nobel Prize for Literature. A wonderful story about Olga Tokarczuk's writing novels, and Alice Munro, Elfriede Jelinek, Wisława Szymborska, and Seamus Heaney. And what I'm talking about with the Nobel Archive is I've now arranged a chronological index of every single winner of the Nobel Prize, and my videos and posts and links, which include links to their writing, samples of their writing, sometimes in the original language as well. So you can find out more about who those writers were, what their history and their context were, what some of their challenges were, and get a bit of a sample of some of their great works, and as well as finding out where you can read some of their works themselves. There you go. It goes all the way down from 2023 to... We'll speed it up here a little bit because it's a long, long way down to 1901 with Sully Prudhomme. It was June this year that I was looking at Sully Prudhomme, and it seems a very long time ago. But yeah, I hope you do check that out. Okay, so who is going to win the prize? We're going to find out in about an hour when the Swedish Academy speaks and they announce the winner. So if you've got any ideas, let me know in the chat as well. We've got audio very low. Is that any better, people? Fellow citizen says the audio is very low, so I'm not quite sure what the problem is there, but let me know if that is any better. I can see, hang on, I'll just do a quick bit of technical checking of things. And it does seem to be coming a bit low, but I'm not quite sure what I can do about that at the moment. Let me know, fellow citizen, if that is any better. I'm not sure what's going on. Let me check something else here. The dilemmas of... is that better, folks? In fact, is that better? Can everyone tell me if that is better? I think that's looking better on my volumes. I think it was turned down a little bit too low on the main input volume. So sorry about that, folks. I'm not sure I can quite replay all of that, but I hope you can hear me well now. I'd love if fellow citizen or Tanya let me know if that is better. Awesome, fantastic. Beautiful. Okay. I should have checked that out a lot earlier, but there you go. There's so many technical things you have to do when we're doing a live stream. You can see why radio shows have producers, so that the broadcasters don't have to do that all by themselves. Let me get back to the script then, and thanks so much for letting me know, fellow citizen. That was really awesome, and thanks Tanya also for letting me know, and SHO, really good too. Give us a bit of feedback. It's the value of a live stream. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you know about some of the likely winners. We'll share some of the stories from the 120 Nobel's Challenge. I'll mention a few wildcard predictions, and then we'll watch the announcement together at about 10 o'clock and do a bit of fast reaction. I have a huge pile of books off to my left here of the potential winners of the Nobel Prize, and I'm hopeful that I've made sufficiently sensible predictions about the likely winners that I might even be able to read a little bit of their works straight after learning who is the 2024 Nobel Prize. Not a whole lot, and I'd love to have any questions along the way. So feel free to throw in questions and comments as we go. And if you're watching the replay, just imagine it's the Academy Awards, and you've tried to block out the news of the big announcement, and you can get all the suspense. Okay, now let me now just have a little give you a little preview of the likely winners of the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2024. And I'll just operate my equipment here. I hope you don't mind. Well, I just have to do it, really, don't I? Okay, so let's have a little look at this little preview of the winners of the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2024. Okay, so you are able to bet on the Nobel Prize. I really don't recommend people do that. As they say, you're likely to be the likelihood is you're going to be losing next. But it is a bit of an insight into what the general crowd think about who might be winning. And I've looked up two betting companies for odds. They give a slightly different list of the top 7 likely winners. The British betting company Ladbrokes has the Chinese writer Kang and the Australian writer Gerald Murnane as the most likely. And then there's the third most likely being Haruki Murakami, the Japanese writer. And then there are a couple of more or less well-known names, including, of course, Margaret Atwood, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale before it became a huge television hit, and the reclusive American writer Thomas Pynchon. And then the Swedish betting company Betsson has a different list, and on that list it's Gerald Murnane and Kang again as the two most likely winners, and with some more or less well-known names. Salman Rushdie may well win the prize. He might even be a sentimental favourite. He can't be in the best of health, I would have thought, these days. And then there's the American Antiguan writer, Jamaica Kincaid, the Australian Indigenous 1 year writer up from like the Gulf of Capricorn area, so far northern Queensland. Alexis Wright is really quite high odds there, 8 to 1. I don't think I've ever been in a situation where two writers from Australia have been in the top 7 odds of winning the Nobel Prize. Then there's the Canadian poet and literary critic Anne Carson, and a South Korean poet, now quite old, Ko Un, bringing up the rear there. So who are these two favourite winners? Kang. Now, Kang is actually a pseudonym, not a pseudonym. What's the word for it? A pen name. Kang. Her real name is Deng Xiaohua, and she's from China, and still lives in the People's Republic of China. She writes novels and stories. She's very much an experimental writer, influenced by Kafka and many modernists. Born in 1953, and some of her more well-known works are Borderland, The Gift of the Dark Earth Mother, Passionate World, and Love in the New Millennium. And I was reading a couple of stories from Love in the New Millennium just an hour or so ago. It was quite hard, I must say, for me to find books by Kang, but I did find them in the State Library of Victoria. And then Gerald Murnane is an Australian writer. A couple of years ago, the New York Times said that he was the most obscure, or the greatest writer who you've never heard of in the world. I've known about Gerald Murnane since the 1980s, but he is actually from my hometown of Melbourne. Born in 1939, he writes novels, stories, essays, again, very much an experimentalist. And it's interesting that two such experimental writers are the favourites to win the Nobel Prize. They haven't really been awarding the Nobel Prize to experimental writers in recent years, but so that might be a clue that the betting odds are not the most reliable source of information on the likely winner, but we will see shortly. His novels and stories and essays include The Plains, Tamarisk Row, Border Districts, and many others. The Plains is perhaps his best and most extraordinary work. What about a couple of wild cards? There is a theory out there that because, the Nobel Committee has been criticised a fair bit for being not so much in the last 20 or 30 years, but certainly in its long stretch very biased towards male writers, but also even in the last 10 or so years really quite biased towards European, Atlantic writers. And so there is a bit of a theory that this year the prize will be awarded to a Asian or oceanic writer, writer from the oceanic world, or the Oceania, the Pacific, has won the prize. And here are three wildcard outsider choices. One I think is a serious possibility, even my actual prediction of the winner, and that is Geetanjali Shree. She is a Hindi writer from India, and her book The Tomb of Sand, and she's pictured with that book there, won the International Booker Prize a year or two ago, and so that has really put her on the international literary scene. There has not been a Indian writer winning the Nobel Prize since 1913, and it is, after all, the world's most populous nation. And that 1913 winner was Rabindranath Tagore, the great Bengali writer, and Geetanjali Shree may well break that. B.S. Naipaul did have Indian heritage, but he was really a Trinidadian and British writer. And then another wildcard is Alexis Wright, although she seems to have shot up in the betting markets in recent years. She is the Indigenous Australian woman who's won, like, every prize there is to win in Australian literary prizes in recent years. A third wildcard is Serhiy Zhadan, who is a Ukrainian poet who's, been spoken highly of by, like, the historian Timothy Snyder. It's possible that the Nobel Committee will, put its toe in the waters of complicated geopolitics. It has, as I have found that, done that many times before over its long history since 1901. But I think Serhiy Zhadan is perhaps being put forward by some supporters of Ukraine. I think it's probably unlikely that he will win it, perhaps especially so since just in the last couple of months Serhiy Zhadan has volunteered to serve on the front lines of the war in Ukraine. You can see him pictured there as a soldier. Okay, so there are three wildcards. Of them, I think that Gitanjali Sri is the most likely, but Kan Zhu and Gerald Murnane are absolutely, well represented people. Yeah, great to see some Melbourne representation in the Nobel Prize. Absolutely the case. Okay, so that is a little bit of a preview of the likely winners. Let me know if you think any one of those is likely to win in the chat. And then what I might do is give you a bit of a rundown of some of the things I've sort of learnt and talked about and discovered in reading 120 Nobel Prizes for Literature winners in 120 days as part of the 120 Nobels Reading Challenge on Substack. Let me just remind you of that Substack page there. There you can see my Nobel archive with all those winners, and there you can see the Substack, jeffrich.substack.com. You can subscribe for free, but you can also join as a paid subscriber, in which case you get access to the Nobel archive. You can browse and explore the history of the Nobel Prize for Literature at any time and discover some absolutely fantastic writing along the way. And you'll also get all my other writing on world affairs, history, and every now and then a little bit of very culturally informed geopolitics. Okay, let's just head on over to another thing, and that is my little overview of the 120 Nobel's Challenge. Now just give me 1 second again to manipulate the streaming software, and I'll just bring my picture down for a second. And there you can see the 120 Nobel's Challenge. Now I literally went all the way from 1901 to 2023 in 120 days. And I've just chunked that 120 Nobels into 6 periods and talked about a couple of my highlight writers from those times. In 1901, 1920, there was but it was a really fascinating period. And my favourite writer was perhaps Rabindranath Tagore. To some degree, I sort of discovered the richness of Tagore's writing. He wrote, the national anthem of both India and Bangladesh. His songs are still performed in Bangladesh and India today. And his writing of essays, as well as his stories and his poetry, is really quite magnificent. He's definitely lasted. But the 1901-1920 period was very much a period of, I guess, what would you say? It was a period of, I would say it was a period of nationalism in the choices, and also a period where there was a lot more German influence, I think, in the choices of the Nobel Prize. In that German influence really continued on into really the 1920s, I think, as well. Really only changing into the 1930s. In the 1930s, there were, I think, 3 or 4 Americans. I think it was 3 Americans and 1 Brit who won the Nobel Prize. But my favourite from the era of 1921 to 1939 was Thomas Mann, who wrote The Magic Mountain. And Thomas Mann, The Magic Mountain, absolutely brilliant book. It's also a book that is sort of riffed off in this wonderful new book by Olga Tokarczuk, the 2018 winner of the Nobel Prize, The Impusium. This book has really just come out like in the last week or so in English translation. It's a couple of years old in its original Polish, and it is a sort of retelling of the story of Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain. Absolutely wonderful read, as is Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain. And then, and I should say that the Olga Tokarczuk, as you can see in my little summary, is also one of my favourites from the last 20 years of the Nobel Prize, and I'll be writing more about Olga Tokarczuk on my Substack at jeffrich.substack.com, so do check that out. And then 1944 to 1963, there's a bit of a break there for the obvious reason of World War II. The prize resumes actually in 1944 and is given to a Danish writer who is about to be liberated from German occupation, because Denmark was, of course, occupied by Germany in 1944. I'm not quite sure why they chose to resume the prize in 1944 while the war was still raging, but they also awarded the prize during World War I as well. But in my favourite from this period of 20 years, from 44 to 1963, was the great Russian poet, novelist, author of Dr. Zhivago, the great book, much better than the movie Dr. Zhivago, Boris Pasternak. It was also a very controversial choice in one of those cases where the Nobel Prize got caught up with not just literary values but political values. It was a sort of an issue in the midst of the Cold War, and I tell that story in my post on Boris Pasternak on Substack. In between 1964 and 1983, a huge range of writers were awarded the prize. In 1964, Jean-Paul Sartre was awarded the prize and refused the prize. In 1969, I think, Samuel Beckett won the prize. In 1974, there was an enormous controversy because two Swedish writers were awarded the prize. Last time, I think, two writers were awarded the prize in a single year. Who knows, maybe they'll do it again this year. And they were, I've forgotten their names now, Harry Martinson and another chap, I've forgotten it. I didn't really keep that detail with me, but one of them was involved in the Swedish Academy. It was all seen as a bit of an inside job. But of those writers, my favourite was the Nelly Sachs, the German Jewish poet who actually lived after fleeing Germany in the early 1930s, lived in Sweden. Nelly Sachs, whose poetry is an absolutely emotionally wrenching, wonderful account of the events that she suffered and her people suffered in that era, trying to avoid certain words that provoke problems on the YouTube algorithm. Let me then go forward to the next little era, which is 1984 to 2003. And my absolute favourite from this period is the Polish poet Wisława Szymborska, who in fact I've read her poetry on the YouTube channel. Occasionally her wonderful poem, The End and the Beginning, says how after every war someone has to clean up. She has this wonderful wry humour, wonderful generous perspective, deeply humane poetry, absolutely wonderful, wonderful poet. And then in the final little period, so many great writers, 2004 to 2023, but my favourite is Olga Tokarczuk, the absolutely brilliant Polish novelist who wrote the books of Jacob. And I think if you look at just behind me there, I think I've got my finger right there, you can see Olga Tokarczuk's The Books of Jacob. I'm developing a plan of doing a bit of a read-along of this absolutely wonderful 1,000-page book, which I describe as the best historical fiction of the 21st century, on my Substack next year. So do make sure you subscribe so you can find out all about that. But I'll also be letting people know about it here on YouTube. Okay, so there's some of the favourites. Now, what I've also have just noticed here is a couple of lessons I learnt from trying to read 120 Nobel Prizes or Nobel Prize winners in 120 days. It really was quite a challenge, an absolute extraordinary challenge, really. But I did it. I can't quite believe I did do it, but you know, I really did do it, and it is. I learnt so much from it, and I really actually had a wonderful time. I'm not sure how many Nobel Prizes you might have read. I started the process having read 44, and I ended up having read 121. Reader or viewer said to me that they also had read every single one of the 120 Nobel Prizes, but I'm sure they haven't also written a Substack post and a video on all of them as well. So it was quite a challenge. But I made a lot of discoveries along the way. The extraordinary poet, writer, novelist, and protector of a national European or subnational European tradition, Friedrich Mistral, from I think it was 1904. He actually believed not in France. He was, nominally from France, but he believed in a part of France which you might think of as Provence, the old area of the troubadours, also known as Occitania. So some really extraordinary discoveries along the way, as well as some rediscoveries as well. And I'm sure if you have been following along with the 120 Nobels Challenge, this might also be the case for you. Thomas Mann was one of those, I think. Absolutely, Thomas Mann was one of those. Rudyard Kipling, in a strange sort of way, was one of those. Rudyard Kipling, a very old writer, and you might think that he was... Excuse me, one second. You might think that he was a old imperialist, jingoistic poet, but there's a lot more complexity. Arguably, he was indeed one of the first Indian winners of the Nobel Prize. He was, in fact, born in Bombay, but he was very much part of the British Raj. And then the other observation is, thank God for the poets. If all these prizes had been novelists, and I know a few people along the way said on YouTube that, they really preferred the novelists and found all the poets a little bit odd. And in a way, the novels are often more immediately accessible, I guess, for people. But if I had to read a long, long, long novel, and a lot of the winners of the Nobel Prize wrote very, very, very long novels over these last 120 days, I really don't think I could have quite sampled things. And there were some brilliant poets along the way. Jaroslav Seifert, who I didn't really know of at all, was the great Czech poet who won in, I think it was the early 1980s. I can't quite remember the date at this point, and many others, including some of the very obscure writers from the first, 20 or 30 years, people like Carl Spitaler and others who there are very few English translations of. Many great Italian poets, Salvatore Quasimodo, and others as well. So it's been a wonderful journey through the poetry of the Nobel Prize as well. And on all my Substack posts, where I can, I've tried to include a little bit of the original language of the poetry as well. Pablo Neruda, I know I put some of one of his poems in Spanish, Gabriela Mistral, and others as well. And then, look, finally, the big point, I guess, is going through 120 Nobels isn't just a literary exercise. It actually gives one an extraordinary insight into the cultural history of the world. It's a very unique window on the cultural history of the world, and you learn about the era of dominant pan-German culture in Europe in the early part of the 20th century. You find out about the emerging influence of America in the middle of the 20th century. There's the Cold War, as was evident with Boris Pasternak and Alexander Solzhenitsyn's prizes, and the legacy of colonialism, even as early as Rabindranath Tagore's Nobel Prize. You see the surprising presence of Indian literature and cultural influence in those early prizes, not just in Rabindranath Tagore, but a number of the other winners of the Nobel Prize wrote updated European versions of the great Indian stories, particularly the story of the Buddha. So it's an extraordinary level of actual influence of Indian culture in interpenetration and mutual influence of cultures throughout the last 120 years of the Nobel Prize. Long may it continue. But I do feel that an Indian writer does really deserve the prize pretty soon, more so than, yet another European or North American. All right, let's drop the slideshow. And now what we might do here is just check in on how we're going here with you can see in the bottom corner there, that is the actual live stream of the Nobel announcement. I'm going to keep it fairly, I will bring it up a bit, make it a bit bigger when the actual announcement begins, but for now I'll just keep it small, just to check in on how we're going. Okay, let's have a look at some of the comments here. We've got Freya Rich saying, I wonder who will win. And Tanya Patson saying, I think the announcement itself is on around 10 p.m. That's right, it's on about 10 p.m. When we get the actual, I think generally what happens is they bring the stream on, and you see a group of 20 or so journalists sitting in a quite nice little formal room in the Swedish Academy, and then a couple of representatives of the Swedish Academy come out. They initially speak in Swedish. If you listen very carefully, you can usually pick up the name of the winner in the little Swedish talk, and then they'll give the detail in English, and then they sort of ask some questions, and then I'll probably cut out the Nobel stream after once they finish giving the little announcement and the little overview of the writer, and then we'll hear what people say. Thanks, Freya. Thanks, saying the context is excellent, and you do need it to understand the final announcement. The actual, it's always been a very controversial prize and difficult prize. I can see someone saying Nobel Prize is a joke, and a lot of people question it. Question it because there have been some real scandals about the Nobel Prize. There have been some very interesting choices about the Nobel Prize. My personal low point, I think, with the Nobel Prize was in 2016 when the Nobel Prize went to Bob Dylan. I know not everyone feels that way, but that's certainly how I feel. And then we also have Isaac Rich saying, heading to Japan next week, go Murakami. There's also another Japanese author who is in the running for, or on the sort of list for a prize, who's, let me just check her name. It is Yoko Tawada, who writes in both German and Japanese. So who knows? We could see two, or there might be. There are two potential Japanese winners of the Nobel Prize this year. And then what else do we have? We have here a comment from. Is the awardee released? Yeah, it's going to be announced at shortly after 10 p.m. That's right, and they just. But the actual they won't be there. The committee announce them. They've usually contacted them just beforehand, and yeah, well, let's everyone just be polite to each other in the chat. Yeah, who knows? Murakami could win. Sometimes the more popular authors, or commercially successful authors, are not really awarded. I guess often it's. The Nobel Prize is a good way to give more prominence to a writer who hasn't perhaps received quite the same level of international attention, like Olga Tokarczuk, who was hugely successful in Poland but not very well known outside Poland until after the Nobel Prize. And a couple of years ago, he's got a complex first name, but the second name is Gerner, who actually has no attributed nationality. He's a kind of refugee from Zanzibar who ended up in England. He had very little commercial success before winning the Nobel Prize, so it is quite common for them to choose writers other than the big names in that bucket, really, as well. And there we can see here people are now assembling in the room. Let me just bring this up for you. And there we are. The announcement of the 2024 Nobel Prize in Literature, live announcement, 1300 CE. Central European Standard Time. And there we go. See the small group of journalists who are eagerly awaiting the announcement. Okay, so let me just let's go to a couple of other points that I can just highlight in the 10 or 15 minutes or so that we have here to the 10 or 15 minutes that we have to just talk about things, and we'll just have a little look at a couple of other writers who are in the running. And one of those is the person we were just talking about there in the chat, Haruki Murakami. Let me see, where are we? There we go. I finally clicked the right button. It's quite stressful doing these live streams. There are so many buttons and sources, and one does occasionally get it wrong. So Haruki Murakami is from Japan. He was born in 1949. He has written many, many novels, essays, stories. Including what I've been told are his best books, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle and Kafka on the Shore. He's also written a book called IQ 84, and that's IQ 84 right there. Very thick book. I've made a start. I've only got about, I don't know, a sixth of the way through that book and then sort of lost it a little bit. But he's also written quite a few things, including a book about his T-shirt collections, and this book here, A Novelist as a Vocation. So we will see if we need to read more of Haruki Murakami in a little while. Another mooted candidate is Cesar Era, who is from Argentina, born 1949, writes stories, novels, essays, including Festival and Game of the Worlds, and an episode in the life of a landscape painter. He's enormously prolific. Then we have a more obscure writer, the poet Urzi Soteropoulos from Greece, born 1953. She writes poetry and fiction, including What's Left of the Night and Zigzag Through the Bitter Orange Trees. And then another favoured candidate is Margaret Atwood, who is from Canada, born again 1939. Often the Nobel Prize does go to people quite, towards the end of their life, as I guess something of a lifetime achievement award. Although in recent years it has gone to younger. Olga Tokarczuk was just in her 50s and has since published a very fine novel, and Books of Jacob was only published in English after the Nobel Prize. But Margaret Atwood's written The Handmaid's Tale, a collection of her poetry called Paper Boat, and her most recent work is The Testaments, which I actually have here, and so we could even read from that if she does in fact win the prize. And then finally we have not quite finally, we also have Thomas Pynchon, who is really, I guess, the original postmodernist novelist, you could say. He wrote The Crying of Lot 49, Gravity's Rainbow, a notoriously difficult book to read, and Mason and Dixon. Again, I have those books with me here. Here we go. There's Gravity's Rainbow for you. And it is notoriously difficult. I've never really attempted it, but we shall see if I do, because I will write something about the winner of the 2024 Nobel Prize. I'm hoping it's not Thomas Pynchon. I just don't think I could really cope. And then what else have we got here? Let me just, I might just quickly check in on our announcement page so that we don't miss it. And what I can also give you here is a longer list of people who are on the odds. So some of these writers might appear. Anne Carson, I've mentioned. Bushra al-Makhtari is a Yemeni poet. Karl Frode Tiller is either Norwegian or Swedish. Norbert Gistrein is an Austrian novelist. Pierre Michon is a French novelist. Don DeLillo. I actually saw a tweet from somebody today saying Don DeLillo had won the 2024 Nobel Prize. I think they were just messing with us. Again, he's a bit like Thomas Pynchon, but a little bit more accessible than Thomas Pynchon. Lyudmila Ulskaya is a Russian novelist. Laszlo Krasznahorkai is a particularly difficult and but engaging Hungarian novelist. And we have Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who's a famous Kenyan novelist who's been widely reputed to be going to win the Nobel Prize. There has been one or two, certainly one African winner, or broadly African winner in the recent years, so he seems to have slipped down the odds. But we also have a longer odds list from the Swedish betting agency, which has some similar ones, but I wonder if the Swedish betting agency is a little bit more attuned to the mindset of the Swedish Academy. They also have their Karl Ove Knausgård at 20 to 1 odds. He's the Norwegian novelist who writes, insufferably long books about his own private experiences, and was a bit of a cult figure there for a while. I don't know if he really deserved to be so. Alrighty, let's see how we're going with our friends there over at the Nobel Prize area. I might just have a little bit of a drink. We've got about 5 minutes or so to go, so this would be a great time if anyone had any questions, just to throw them in on the chat while I take a brief break from talking, and we shall see how we go. And when the announcement begins, I'll have to put my headphones on, obviously. Hopefully all the sound will work well. And if you haven't already, why don't I just remind everyone to go over and check out my Substack at jeffrich.substack.com. It's really becoming a bit of the hub of all my content at this point. Obviously, I do all the work on YouTube, but I guess the best quality of my work you can really find here at Substack, where I've just done this piece here on how the tides of globalization turned against the West, which looks at the big changes in, I guess, world history that have been happening over the last 30 years or so. How this is an issue I've actually discussed recently on a show with Hrvoje Moric and also with Pascal Lataz, so do check those out. I think I've given links to the first of those on the YouTube community site, and I think we've got a little bit of action happening on the announcement front, so let me just bring this down and we will just listen in for a second. I think what is happening is the Swedish Academy is just announcing the procedures. So what I might do is I just make this a bit bigger and make this a bit smaller, and once we see the announcement start, I will switch the sound on for the streaming part. They're saying that the oldest person to be awarded the Literature Prize was Doris Lessing, 87. And yes, I knew that, and that it's been shared between two individuals on 4 occasions. One was in World War I period, 1917, I think. One was in 66, one was in 74, and when was the first was very early, in 1904. I think it was shared between Frederic Mistral and Jose Echegaray, the Spanish dramatist. There we go. 120 individuals have been awarded the prize. And you can see the people will come through that door any second now. I don't quite know why why it's so dull, but I think that sort of dull overlay of the thing will sort of come off once the actual real broadcast begins. Thank you, Freya, for the super chat. And I should point out, of course, you can do a super chat. You will earn my gratitude, my thanks. You can also click the thanks button. And of course, you can support the Burning Archive by taking out a paid subscription at chefrich.substack.com. It's just $8 a month, or $80 US, that is, a year, about $10 and $100 Australia. But very much big thank you to Freya. Bing. There we go. Oh, here we go. Not quite. But any second now. They will come through those doors and make the announcement. The selection committee in process. That's it's. They had a big scandal about 5 years ago. Here we go.
Varmt välkomna till Svenska Akademin och detta års tillkännagivande. Jag heter Mats Malm, jag är akademins ständiga sekreterare. Akademin har just sammanträtt och det är dags att meddela beslutet om vem som tilldelas årets Nobelpris i litteratur. Very welcome to the Swedish Academy. My name is Mats Malm. I fill the function of permanent secretary. The Academy has convened and can now announce its decision on the Nobel Prize in Literature. Nobelpriset i litteratur år 2024 tilldelas den sydkoreanska författaren Kang för hennes intensiva poetiska prosa som konfronterar historiens trauman och blottlägger människans sårbarhet. The Nobel Prize in Literature for 2024 is awarded to South Korean author Kang for her intense poetic prose that confronts historical traumas and exposes the fragility of human life. Jag nådde precis Kang i sitt hem. Hon hade just avslutat middag med sin son. Det verkade vara en stillsam dag i Seoul. Vi har kunnat tala lite grann om december och vad som ska hända där. Men framförallt så gläder jag mig åt att tala mer med henne efterhand. I was able to talk to Kang on the phone. She was having an ordinary day, it seems, had just finished supper with her son. She wasn't really prepared for this, but we have begun to discuss preparations for December. We look very much forward to meeting her here then. Jag lämnar nu ordet till Nobelkommitténs ordförande Anders Olsson som kommer att berätta om pristagaren. Efter det kommer ledamöterna i Nobelkommittén Ellen Mattsson och Anna-Karin Palm att svara på frågor i individuella intervjuer. I now give the floor to Anders Olsson, chair of the Nobel Committee, who will present the laureate. After that, committee members Ellen Mattsson and Anna-Karin Palm will be answering questions in individual interviews. Thank you.
Välkomna till denna presskonferens om 2024 års Nobelpristagare i litteratur, Kang. Mitt namn är Anders Olsson, ordförande i Nobelkommittén. Övriga medlemmar i kommittén som har förberett årets Nobelpris i litteratur är Ellen Mattsson, Anna-Karin Palm, Steve Sem-Sandberg och Anne Svärd. Adjungerad medlem i kommittén har varit Mats Malm, Anna-Karin Palm, Steve Sem-Sandberg and Anne Svärd. Our co-opted committee member has been Mats Malm, permanent secretary of the Swedish Academy. After my presentation of the laureate's work in Swedish and English, my colleagues from the Nobel Committee, Ellen Mattsson and Anna-Karin Palm, will take individual interviews from the floor. More information about our laureate can be found on the Nobel Foundation's website, www.nobelprize.org. 2024 års Nobelpristagare i litteratur, Kang, är den första författaren från Sydkorea som erhåller Nobelpriset i litteratur.
He does go in and out between Swedish and English. Kang was not on my list. I don't think she was on the betting list, so this is another surprise. But I guess the gossip that there was going to be an Asian woman writer has proved correct. So yeah, I'm just checking out a little bit of information on Kang, and I'll report on that once he's finished the little speech. I'm just talking over the Swedish bit.
Och den förstärks av hennes metaforiskt laddade prosakonst. I romanen Lektioner i grekiska från 2011, som ännu är oöversatt till svenska, utvecklas varsamt ett kärleksmöte mellan en kvinna som förlorat förmågan att tala och hennes lärare i klassisk grekiska som håller på att bli blind. Boken blir en vacker meditation över förlust, intimitet och språkets yttersta villkor. En annan politisk klangbotten har romanen Levande och döda från 2014, där Kang utgår från en historisk händelse i staden Gwangju, där hon själv växte upp och där hundratals studenter och obeväpnade civila mördades i en massaker 1980. Med sin brutala konklusion närmar sig Kang här vittneslitteraturen som genre. I den vita boken från 2016 får Kangs lyriska stil åter dominera. Det är en sorgsång ägnad den person som hade varit jagets stora syster om hon inte hade gått bort bara ett par timmar efter födseln. I en följd av korta anteckningar som alla handlar.
If I talk now, is there no audio feedback? I'm not sure, but I'll do my best. Yeah.
Som boken når fram till sina sista ord. I det vita, bland alla de vita tingen, kommer jag att andas in det sista andetag du gav ifrån dig. En annan höjdpunkt i författarskapet är slutligen Jag tar inte farväl från 2021. En berättelse som utspelas i skuggan av en massaker i Sydkorea som ägde rum 1950 på den lilla ön Jeju. Där arkebuserades tiotusentals människor, barn och gamla, misstänkta för att vara kollaboratörer. Boken gestaltar mästerligt ett sorgearbete som berättaren utför tillsammans med sin väninna, där båda bär på den katastrof som drabbar.
So, yeah, I think I've sorted the feedback issue, but I'm not 100% sure. The Swedish part of the talk is going a bit long, but I'm pretty sure he'll give it in English as well. That's what he's normally done in the previous episodes. Or ceremonies. And usually what he's doing gives a little sort of literary analysis of the writer, some of the main themes, some of the reasons they chose him.
The 2024 Nobel Laureate in Literature is the first writer from South Korea to be awarded the Literature Prize. She was born in 1970 in Gwangju and has alongside her authorship also devoted herself to music and art. Her work in crossing the boundaries between art forms is clearly reflected in her writing, which has a broad span in terms of genre. In 1993, she debuted as a poet in the magazine Literature and Society, and 2 years later made her prose debut with a collection of short stories. Her major international breakthrough was the novel The Vegetarian from 2007, and a harshly effective yet poetic portrayal of the violent consequences that proceed from the protagonist's refusal to eat meat. Kang's physical empathy for the vulnerable, often female lives, is palpable and reinforced by her metaphorically charged prose. In the novel Greek Lessons from 2011, love develops tenderly between a woman who has lost the power of speech and a teacher of ancient Greek who himself is losing his sight. The book becomes a beautiful meditation around loss, intimacy, and the ultimate conditions of language. In the novel Human Acts from 2014, Han Kang this time employs as a political foundation a historical event that took place in the city of Gwangju, where she herself grew up, and where hundreds of students and unarmed civilians were murdered during a massacre in 1980. In her brutal actualization, Han Kang approaches the genre of witness literature. In the White Book from 2016, Han Kang's poetic style once again dominates. The book is an elegy dedicated to the person who could have been the self's elder sister, but who passed away only a couple of hours after birth. In a sequence of short notes, all concerning white objects, it is through this whiteness that the work as a whole is associatively constructed. This makes it less a novel and more a kind of secular prayer book, as it has also been described. It is in addressing the dead that the novel reaches its final words. Within that white, all of those white things, I will breathe in the last breath you released. Another highlight of her authorship is finally We Do Not Part from 2021. The story unfolds in the shadow of a massacre that took place in the late 1940s on South Korea's Jeju Island, where tens of thousands of people, among them children and the elderly, were shot on suspicion of being collaborators. The book masterfully portrays the mourning process undertaken by the narrator and her female friend, who both carry with them the disaster that has befallen their relatives. With an imagery that is as precise as it is condensed, Han Kang emphasizes not only the power of the past over the present, but also the friend's attempts to bring to light what has fallen into collective oblivion and transform their trauma into a joint art project which lends the book its title. In her oeuvre, Han Kang, as expressed in the Academy's citation, confronts historical traumas and in each of her works exposes the fragility of human life. She has a unique awareness of the connections between body and soul, the living and the dead, and in her poetic and experimental style has become an innovator in contemporary prose. Several works are translated to French and German. In English, we have Convalescence from 2013, The Vegetarian, 2015, Human Acts, 2016, The White Book, 2017, Europa, 2019, Greek Lessons, 2023, and We Do Not Part, which is planned to come out next year in 2025. Thank you for listening and for joining us today. And now I will give the word to Ellen Mattsson and Anna-Karin Palm for individual interviews. Thank you.
Right now, this part of the briefing is over, and we'll move on to the interviews.
Okay. Okay, so I am just going to do this, and there we can see Han Kang's website. Polo 27 says, Bro Tommy shills in vain. It's been 10 years waiting. I don't know. Many people, many great writers have not won the Nobel Prize. Let me also just quickly turn off the little stream there. And that should make sure we have no issues. So while the stream has been going on, I have also just checked out Han Kang on the internet. Fortunately, Han Kang has her own website. So if you want to find out about the author Han Kang, the new winner of the Nobel Prize, you can of course go to Wikipedia, and I've noticed somebody has already added a sentence that Han Kang was won the 2024 Nobel Prize to Wikipedia, but they spelt she wrong in their haste. There was a slight typo. But there you can see Han Kang's little biography, which was also covered a little bit in the announcement. She was born in Gwangju in 1970, and since the age of 10, she grew up in Suruyu and in Seoul, and has been publishing really novels since the early 1990s. The main books seem to be The Vegetarian and Human Acts, the main ones that people have been talking about in English at least, and some others on their way. I do not bid farewell, winning awards in France in 2023 and 2024. And you can find on her website here, you can see all her books, her novels, Do Not Bid Farewell, The White Book, and others, The Human Acts, there in both the original Korean as well as the various translations, many language translations, the Greek lessons, The Wind is Blowing, The Vegetarian, and Your Cold Hands, Black Deer from 1998, and that's all there. They're all the novels, and she's also, of course, a poet. I'll just scroll up there, and also writes short stories there. Her last book of poetry, which is only in Korean and Japanese. Poetry obviously doesn't always translate so well. Put the Evening in the Drawer from 2013. I suspect she'll get translated before too long into English. So Han Kang, complete surprise, and that's all good. That is all good. I will just get myself fixed up here. So yeah, I don't have any of her books here. I've not read any of Han Kang. There's not a whole lot more I can add. I think I've got a bit of work to do tomorrow in order to try to write my little profile of the 2024 winner. I think it's a sign of a better process from the Nobel Committee that they're choosing relatively young, active writers, and I see here a comment from Kay August that The Vegetarian was one of the dullest books I've ever read. Not sure I will bother with her other work. Well, I'm open to trying to find out. And Tanya Patson says, I think Rudyard Kipling might have been younger when he won the Nobel Prize. Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? 1970. Rudyard Kipling was the youngest and he was 40-something. So what's 1970? That makes her 54. So yes, Rudyard, well done, Tanya Paxton. That's absolutely correct. I think he was 46 or something like that. But yeah, definitely one of the younger winners. But rather than just choosing writers like as a final award before they die, sort of thing. And there have been a few winners of the Nobel Prize who have died a year or two after getting the award. So very much a late life, honour and lifetime achievement award. And I think in a way it's good that some of these writers from different literary traditions, different cultures, while still in the prime of their writing life, as I'm sure Kang is, are actually getting it. And the betting agencies absolutely miss it. But the betting agencies really, I highly suspect that publishing companies have some role in pimping various authors winning the Nobel Prize. It's a bit disappointing that Gerald Murnane didn't win, and I absolutely did not pick this either. I wasn't entirely off track with the choice of a South Asian writer. I do feel it's about time that South Asia did get a Nobel Prize. Maybe next year, we shall see. Okay, well, look, I think we might wrap up. I would, if I had known anything more about the winner and have one of their works at hand, would have sort of said a little bit more at this point. But I think we've done pretty well with the Nobel stream. Yet again, the Swedish Academy proves that it is an unpredictable beast. Don't bet on the Nobel Prize. Don't kid yourself that you think you know what the Nobel Committee is thinking. They do absolutely respond to different trends, and maybe it's also part of the reforms, I guess, of the committee. I know Tanya Paxton was asking about the process in the selection committee a little bit earlier. There was a big sex scandal involving the Swedish Academy, which I did cover in one of my Substack posts recently, that actually led to the 2018 prize only being awarded in 2019 because there wasn't a quorum basically on the committee. There were resignations and expulsions and drama and all that kind of stuff. And since then, there was a bit of a clear out of some of the arrogant, high-handed macho culture within the committee, and there's been a lot more openness to the process. It is chosen by 18 members of the Swedish Academy, and there's prescribed organisations who are allowed to nominate things. They go through quite a process. A lot of the predictions are based on, there's apparently some sort of record of what books are in the Swedish Academy's library, and sometimes people make bets or predictions on the basis of that. The actual criteria for selecting are very broad, go all the way back to the Nobel Testament, and have been interpreted incredibly widely in recent years. But there's been, I think, a distinct shift towards, both female writers and, different cultures since, really since the 1990s, but increasingly so since the 2017 scandal, and maybe also a bit of a shift to highlighting writers of different traditions who perhaps haven't received the level of international recognition and attention. And I think the Nobel Prize for Literature should be used for that kind of purpose. So I really commend this choice of Han Kang. And I will see what I can do about reading some of her books over the next day or two. I'll report back in my Substack at jeffrich.substack.com. And until then, I might sign out from the live stream. And thank you all for joining me. And if you're watching the replay, do give us a like, a share, and a subscribe. Okay, bye now.